The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
In the hands of kids. We know from the research in reading that the more kids read, the better they get at reading and the more independent and active they become as readers. So it's up to us as teachers to create literacy-rich environments in all of the different content areas and in all of our classrooms so kids are encouraged to read. So here are some tips to get kids into books. First of all, get a classroom library. Remember the first classroom library that I had, I always took it as a badge of honor when my classroom library was pretty drained and empty. I would get books from the Salvation Army, church bazaars, wherever I could get my hands on books. And a lot of my friends, even today, when their kids outgrow books, they give them to me because they know that I'll find a home for them in a classroom somewhere. So I've actually distributed many copies of Harry Potter and Diary of a Wimpy Kid to teachers that I've met all over the country. But here are some ideas. So first of all, look for a catchy cover. Look for print size that is generally larger, that kids are going to be more interested in reading. So a Diary of a Wimpy Kid is actually a pretty good model for that. And also great visualization and something that looks like a graphic novel like Wimpy Kid or My Life as a Part-Time Indian for older kids really draws kids into the books. Artwork should be exciting and resembles the real world, and writing is not composed of longer or convoluted sentences. The books that also attract kind of reluctant readers should also have an acceptable literary quality. So something like The Book Thief or Esperanza Rising or Sahara Special have high interest because they're able to hook kids into the text within the first 10 to 15 pages. There should be interesting characters, but again, something that has a lot of characters in it can sometimes be overwhelming. So The Hunger Games, of course, every middle school kid I know is reading the Hunger Games trilogy right now, is a great example of interesting characters that draw kids in. Or The City of Ember trilogy is also wonderful. Plot has a huge impact in sustaining kids' interest and drawing them into a text. Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Book is a perfect example of that has great plot and that's developed through events and dialogue and has themes that are actually appealing to teenagers. So make sure that reluctant readers are also finding books and you're giving them books that present role models and all different kinds of role models. For example, like in Freak the Mighty, where we have a protagonist who has special needs who develops a friendship, and that friendship becomes the core of that book. There's also demonstrates problem solving in action and allowing kids to feel like winners and overcoming odds. And also we have to make sure that there's relationships of all sorts that are represented in the books that we share with kids. And we also want kids to capture the intensity, the uncertainty of our lives in books. So another way that you can get books in the hands of kids is making sure they have a library card. I know it sounds basic, but you'd be amazed how many kids don't have library cards. And you talk about the books that you read and share books with your kids. One of the most inspiring teachers that I ever met was in Western Maryland. She taught fifth grade, and she had the lowest level readers in the school. And every time I walked into her classroom, the kids would immediately go over to her cart of new books and ask her about books. And I saw kids who had never really read before, never really enjoyed reading, were just so intrigued with reading and developed a love for reading because of this teacher. Because all she did was talk about books. She got books for her kids. She developed contests for the kids about the books. And she also allowed for student choices with the books that they read in her class. And she also kept current about books. So one way that you can keep current about books is actually just go on to Amazon.com and pull up the teen section or the young adult section, and you can keep current there. And also you can go to the Allen Review, ALAN, which is a affiliate of National Council of Teachers of English, who have a website where you can look at all the books that kids are reading across the country and develop an even greater list for your kids. As a strategy that we would use for younger students. But kindergarten, first, or second grade classrooms aren't the only place learning centers can be used to build literacy skills and content knowledge. In fact, learning and literacy centers are the intersection between developing literacy skills and content knowledge through middle school, high school, and even beyond. Hi, I'm Katie McKnight, and I've used literacy and learning centers all over the United States in public, parochial, and private schools with students with special needs, general education students, gifted students, and also English language learners. I have yet to find a context in which literacy and learning centers are not extraordinarily effective in meeting the needs of all of our students while we develop literacy skills and content knowledge. Experience has shown that students actually tend to be more engaged when they work in centers. The combination of self-directed activity and short, specific tasks lends itself to the natural strengths of the developing adolescent.
I was excited about it initially, but I thought as well that my students weren't mature enough to handle it because it's a system in which I'm backing off as a teacher and they're more accountable for what they're doing.
Teachers find that learning centers enable them to cover more content and skill development in the same amount of class time. Plus, it's easy to give individual attention and personalized instruction to students who need it. In more practical terms, literacy and learning centers are an opportunity for students to practice their skills and also develop greater content knowledge. They take place after the teacher has demonstrated a skill or modeled a skill in a mini lesson. Students then work in centers to practice and hone their literacy skills and content knowledge. They're not just for an English language arts class. They work in any single subject area: physical education, social studies, mathematics, and science class. Just remember, it's an opportunity for kids to continue to practice their skills while developing their content knowledge in very specific, targeted centers.
You know, the first time I introduced centers was actually during an observation, and I thought, oh my gosh, this went terrible. And then when I sat down and I had my post observation, I realized that it was actually successful because it was a flipped classroom setting, and I was taking the pressure off of myself and actually alleviating it and letting my kids take charge. And I found that it was very successful and that the kids remember what they do in centers longer than what they do, me lecturing to them every day.
When literacy strategies are specifically taught alongside content, students are able to apply those literacy skills in a wide variety of contexts. When we give kids that ample practice time, they begin to foster that independence and they're better able to transfer all of those literacy skills into a wide variety of contexts. And this is what really leads kids to being college and career ready. And because all students, especially our older students between grades 4 through 12, they always ask the question, so what? Why do I have to know algebra? Why do I have to know about this war? Why do I have to read this particular author? And all of that, those are very fair questions. Teenagers, especially in the 21st century, need to understand how this content relates to them in the real world. And when we have things like literacy and learning centers, where kids are able to practice their literacy skills alongside the content knowledge, that's really an opportunity for kids to connect. And it's really critical for us, too, as teachers, to make sure that our lessons are engaging and interesting and motivating for students. And this is really what leads kids to have that empowerment to develop those literacy skills and content knowledge. And I see this happen all over the country in the many different contexts that I've been able to work in different schools. Hi, this is Katie McKnight with Adrienne Clarisi at Hermosa Middle School, and we're going to talk about the importance of directions, written directions. This is our teacher tip right now. So our teacher tip for written instructions is this.
It's really important that we have typed up or written instructions, but are very explicit. If they're not explicit enough, you're going to get 100 questions. And that'll tell you really quick that you need to revise your instructions. So I also like to put it on the cardboard piece because it's not as easy to lose or destroy. and I teach 8th graders, so they're not always mindful of the instructions and where those may end up. So I like to put it on just a piece of cardboard so that it's a little harder for them to destroy.
Sometimes teachers, what they'll do is they'll just project onto their LCD projector in the classroom, or they'll put the directions on the whiteboard. But I really like to have the directions written when the kids come to the center, because one of the things that we want to do is, as soon as they get to a center, remind the kids that the first thing that they need to do is read the directions. So that's our teacher tip for literacy and learning centers is written instructions. Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to get started. I just did a little pre-show for everybody. Just so you know, all of these videos are available here on my YouTube channel. I sound like such a young hipster there, just like all the kiddos there. So we're going to get started here. Let me cue this up, and I see that folks are arriving in. Some of you are already in school or just starting school. Yowza! And you're here. So I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm going to share as much as I possibly can about centers and the literacy and learning centers for grades 4 through 8. And please note that this is being recorded, and we will push out the link for the recording in about 2 days, and I'll have my contact information as well. So if you would like a certificate for your hour of professional development, I would be happy to share that with you, to provide that for you. Okay, so we're going to get started here. Just a little bit about me and engaging learners. Welcome, everybody. My name's Katie McKnight. I have been a professional educator for over 30 years. I am seeing some familiar names on the attendee list, so that makes me very, very excited to see that. So hello to folks I know, and also hello to folks that I'm meeting virtually for the first time. But I started my teaching career over 30 years ago as a Chicago public school, middle school, high school teacher in English and social studies, went on to earn my PhD in reading and literacy from University of Illinois. I did do a stint in higher education for 15 years, but 4 years ago, I left higher education. I'm now a distinguished professor of research at National Louis University here in Chicago, so I could dedicate myself solely to working in classrooms. That's really where my heart and soul is, and working with colleagues. So I've also written 17 books at this point. Number 18, if you can believe it, will be out at some point this fall. And all of my titles are listed on Amazon. And really, I specialize in grades 4 through 12. Once they start getting hormonal, those are my people. So I'm hoping to share a ton of resources and also provide you access to a website. I'm seeing a lot of people are logging in. I hope you're able to hear things and such as well. So I see some caution triangles. If you have some caution triangles up, you might want to double check your settings if you're having difficulty with recording, okay? Because I do look at them. I sometimes get a little distracted too on webinars because I'm looking to make sure that everybody's hearing okay. All right, so engaging learners. I founded Engaging Learners about 3 years ago, and we serve schools in the United States and internationally to promote literacy skills and success for all kids. I have a great team that works with me, and we provide customized professional learning and literacy development and skills-based assessment or standards-based assessment. I have done a webinar on that subject. If you're interested in that, you can go check out my YouTube channel. We also do grant writing. We help schools to develop grants and such so that they can get the professional learning and resources that they need in their schools, and we provide professional coaching. In addition to that, we provide quite a few professional resources to develop literacy skills. You can see engaginglearners.com. I'm going to share some of that, and everybody who's attending today gets a free 14-day membership to that site. If you don't continue on after 14 days, nobody's credit card gets charged or anything like that, and we don't sell our information, because why? I hate it when people do that. So after 14 days, if you don't renew it, it just drops. So you can go in there and grab all the resources that you want. We do update it very regularly as well. And then you can always stay in touch with our newsletter. We send out a very newsy newsletter with all kinds of lessons, tips, things like that. And you can sign up for that at catherinemcknight.com. And then our new website, which is going to consolidate all of these different things, will be hopefully by Labor Day. We're going to get that launched. And of course, you can always reach me at the below number and at katieengagelearners@gmail.com. And also my colleague, Deanna Gallagher, and I, we've been colleagues for, gosh, over 20 years. She and I started our new webcast called Two Lit Literacy Ladies. Get it? Two Lit Literacy Ladies. And we think we're so hip and cool that we're, over 50 years old and we're, doing something like the youngins. So we've got a great podcast. Our last one was Put the R in STEAM, which means reading. Put the R in STEAM for reading. Okay, so let's get started with the content, the research or the why. So just for full disclosure, what I did about, oh gosh, this has been under development now for about 5 to 6 years. And my area is adolescence, and I am completely concerned, grades 4 through 12, that we start seeing these decreases in student performance, especially in reading. Over 60% of kids in grades 4, 8, and 12 in the United States on the NAEP, which is the National Assessment for Educational Progress, brought to you by the U.S. Department of Education, more than 60% of our kiddos are not proficient readers. This is a staggering number, and I feel very strongly that we shouldn't have those kinds of issues or that level of performance. So how do we get at this? Well, the model is based on balanced literacy. Balanced literacy isn't anything new. It's been around for quite some time. It's a philosophy on which many current state standards, including Common Core, are built on. And Crystal, I know you're from Texas, so you guys don't talk Common Core. Also in Indiana, quite a few other states don't, but they are still based on the balanced literacy model, and really follow the philosophy that literacy skills are interrelated, interlinked, and the best way to develop that is having a synergetic curriculum and instruction that works on building all of these. So you can see from this diagram that things like readers workshop, writing workshop, write alouds, modeled reading, modeled writing, all of these are manifestations of balanced literacy. And Crystal and I were chatting back and forth during the pre-show, and she's a reading teacher, and her district uses Lucy Calkins. And so using Lucy Calkins, that's an example of balanced literacy. So yeah, okay. Now I just got the circle, the frozen circle of death, which is like the greatest, worst thing that can happen on a webinar, right? All right, let's see what happens here if it starts catching up. But in the meantime, okay. And so basically what I found was that basically what I found is that I took Daily 5, some of you might be familiar with that, guided reading, put it in a blender, and this is what I got, okay? Gosh, I really hope I don't have to reset that. This is like the worst thing. I shouldn't have jinxed myself, Crystal. I said to Crystal, I'm like, I love it when technology works right, but right now I'm getting the pinwheel of death. Hang on. All right, hang on. I'm getting the Microsoft error. There's a picture of my husband. Everybody can see that. All right, here we go. Let's relaunch. Here we go. Okay. All right, back in business. And so I put those in a blender, and this is basically what we have. It's also built on the gradual release of responsibility. Many of you are familiar with that. I do. Rutherford County, Tennessee, and she's talking about her experience with literacy and learning centers with middle school students. And she says, I didn't expect the kids to do so extraordinarily well with it. I didn't think that they had the maturity and the independence to do that. And I have to tell you, that is a very, very common comment that I hear from colleagues. But the fact of the matter is that when we have these focused centers and we're working on literacy skills, that's where the magic happens. The kids are more attentive. Classroom management issues go down. That's not to say that you still don't have them. You always will. But they go down dramatically when the instruction is focused in the centers-based kind of model. So I've always worked to represent my model that I developed with the literacy and learning centers somehow graphically. And so it's really that content knowledge. And this is what separates this from things like guided reading and Daily 5, is that especially in something like Daily 5, it's really about how to read. And I absolutely love the two sisters and what they've designed with Daily 5. But the conundrum is what do we do when we get into more complex discipline-specific texts? What do we do? How do we support our kids? How do we give them enough practice time with skills and reading these complex texts to become more proficient readers and more independent readers, as well as developing content knowledge? So, really, this is about that synergy, that connection between all three: the student engagement, the literacy skills, and the development of content knowledge. So this is probably the most important slide of the evening, probably of your professional life this year. And so it's a good thing we're recording it. And so Richard Allington, Dr. Allington, did a meta-analysis. It was published in Ed Leadership about 5 years ago. And he did a meta-analysis on schools that had the greatest growth nationally in the United States. And he found that every school, no matter if it was elementary, middle school, or high school, all of them had a great literacy program that promoted these 6 things, which also happened to be foundational elements of balanced literacy. And Crystal was saying that they're using balanced literacy there in Houston, Texas. So, and again, if you have any questions, you can use that question area and send them to me. We may not get to them until the very end of the webcast, but please go ahead and post your questions, and I will get to those definitely at the end or throughout the course of the webinar. Okay, so here's what he found. Here's the 6 things, okay? The first thing that he found is that every child reads accurately. Now, when we're in grades 4 through 8, with the little guys, that means more of the letter sound recognition, like B means buh, and S means s. But when we get with older kids, it has to do more with monosyllabic words and actually more tier 3 vocabulary, as Marzano would call it, refer to it, in more discipline-specific texts. So specifically, that would mean like a kid comes across the word continent and reads it as content or content. That's what we're talking about. And then every child reads something he or she understands. So we need to differentiate text as much as we possibly can. And sometimes that is a big undertaking. So what I implore to all of you this evening is just, do it as much as you can, as much as what is possible, okay? And then, of course, and I'm actually going to be doing a fall webinar on specifically differentiating. Okay, I'm having problems with PowerPoint tonight. Let me get back up there. At least it's not GoToMeeting, right? So here we go. Let me go back. There we go. Okay, so, but do it as much as you possibly can. And I'm going to do a future webinar specifically on differentiating text this fall. And as a reminder, the web series that I do, each season is really my way of giving back to my community of colleagues, of teachers. So it is like no cost professional development, and that's why I provide the certificates as well. So I am
I am a teacher at heart as well. So every child reads about or writes about something personally meaningful. And this doesn't mean that anything goes. It doesn't mean that we keep writing about our pet hamster all the way from first grade to sixth grade. What it means is that that kids have options. They have opportunities to write about something that means something to them. So, for example, in seventh grade U.S. history, and I'm teaching about the U.S. Constitution, and we're looking at the Bill of Rights, I might ask the kids, I want you to write an evidence based argument as to whether or not which of the following amendments in the Bill of Rights are no longer relevant today. And kids oftentimes choose harboring of soldiers. They don't quite understand why in 2018 that's still something that we should have on the books. And they write an evidence-based argument. So the skill is the same. They're writing about a paper about evidence-based argument that's evidence-based argumentation, an argumentation paper. They're analyzing content that they're learning in U.S. history, and they're getting to choose within that what they want to write about. So that's what we're getting at there when we're talking about older grades. And then every child talks with peers about reading and writing. And this is true about mathematics. There's a substantial amount of research that when learners talk about their learning and they talk about reading and writing and mathematics, that they have higher performance and higher levels of cognition and understanding. And then every child listens to a fluent adult read aloud. This is true whether or not kids are in circle time at kindergarten reading a fairy tale, as it is for a sixth grade teacher teaching kids how to read a math case study or a math problem. Kids need to see us as adults, as mathematicians, historians, literary analysis, and how we read those texts as adults. They need to see that. And then every child reads something he or she chooses. So number 2 and number 5 are very closely related because kids generally choose what they can handle. They generally choose texts that they can access. So those are really the 6 things. And I always say, with this model that I share, the Literacy and Learning Center model, that no one knows their kids better than you do, better than the educator who is with those kids 180 days. No one knows them better. So I always say, look back on this list of 6. And given the adjustments that you've made and the changes that you made, are you still meeting these things on a very regular basis? Are you hitting all of this, every day or 3 days? If you have a more of a middle school model where you see the kids for 50 to 90 minutes a day. Maybe it's more of, every 2 days you're hitting all these. But if you're self-contained with your kiddos, more what we would see in 4th and 5th grade, are you hitting this every day in some kind of fashion? And if you are, you got it. You're all set. You're runway ready. Okay, so here's what it looks like. This is a classroom in Indiana that I had the privilege of working with for quite some time. And if you notice this 5th grade class, you'll see lots of things going on here. The kids are all involved in their work, and oftentimes colleagues will say, well, the kids are engaged. When I say, what do you notice? They say, well, the kids are engaged. And how do you know they're engaged? Well, I've got this kiddo here who's in a reading together center, and he's reading his Just Right book, and you can see eyes on the page. He's tracking. It's not fake reading that he's actually reading. And then these kiddos are working on a vocabulary activity that's in one of their textbooks that they're using. They're actually using Sadlier's Progress, which I happen to like a lot. It's a great resource, and think very highly of that publication. And then this over here, these gals have a cup up. You can see that just the very top of it, there's a yellow cup, and the girls have a question, and they're tracking down their teacher, Miss Maddox, because they have a question about a writing assignment that they're working on. But you can see that in that classroom, there's quite a bit going on. And sometimes at first, centers seem to be a little bit overwhelming. But what most teachers say to me, it's really a shift in the work that we do that's setting them up It does require, preparation and such, but it does if we do traditional lessons too. And they say that when they are working with the kids, they can do more hands-on kinds of things with the kids. And you're going to hear from another colleague of mine in a little bit. So here's what it looks like. This is the structure that I recommend. It's also in my book, Literacy and Learning Centers for the Big Kids. It's available on Amazon. And there's the mini lesson, the whole group instruction. And I'm oftentimes asked, how long should the mini lesson be? Well, what we know from neuroscientists is that your attention span is generally your chronological age times 1. So at 52, my attention span should be about 52 minutes. Anybody who knows me at all knows that that's not true. And if you're teaching 8th graders, it should be 13 minutes. That's the max, okay? And then from there, in that mini lesson or whole, oh gosh, I can't believe that it's crashing again. All right, here we go. This is what I get when it installed updates. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so when I do my mini lesson, if I have 8th graders, my mini lesson should be no more than 13 minutes. And then we go into guided practice. And so, for instance, in the mini lesson, I might, as a social studies teacher, teach kids how to source a document, teach them how to source a primary source document. And then in like pairs or maybe threes, they do that, the same thing. They might source another primary source document. And then the centers, and I'm going to show you how I structure those, are naturally conducive to things like formative assessment, differentiated instruction, building content knowledge or discipline-specific knowledge, and RTI or multi-tiered intervention, whatever you might call it in your district, because it depends where you are, what folks call it. So the centers really allow for all of those things to happen. And I always tell colleagues, focus on the pedagogy, the structure here. And if you do that, all these other things start falling into place. And so here's how it looks in action. This is from a middle school in East St. Louis. It's a 7th grade class, and the students are looking at literature, horror literature, HORROR. And what I want you to look at, specifically, she has her mini lesson, she has guided practice, and then the kids go into centers. So she duplicates her centers. So there's basically 2 grocery lines. And then there's 3 activities within each one, and they're identical. So the kids work on a writing prompt, they have discussion questions, and those are identical activities. And this is also an inclusion classroom as well. And you'll see that her co-teacher is kind of over by the windows because he doesn't like to be filmed. But I'd like you to take a look at this and see what you observe, because I find that, especially with webinars, because it's such a wonky kind of delivery system, that the more I can show you, the better. So here we go. Let's take a look at this video. And that Allington 6, those balanced literacy elements, where do you see evidence of that? Okay, so here we go.
We've been working on the unit about the horror genre. We've defined what the horror genre is and what it isn't. We've had the opportunities to read a lot of scary stories, which you guys love. And today you get a chance to showcase what it is that you've learned throughout the course of this unit. We are going to work in our centers. We have different tasks at each center. You guys will move from center 1 here. What is the horror genre? Center 2, theme, and center 3, you get to do some writing, some creative writing. I had 3 different centers. The first center, the students were given the elements or the characteristics of the horror genre. What makes a horror story a horror story? They first had to go back to that literary criticism, and I think it's important for them to read literary analysis and criticisms, not just all literatures and short stories and poems, but they had to go back to that literary criticism, highlight the elements of a horror story first, and then they applied that to Frankenstein. They were asked to go back into that. It was a poem, actually. and they had to find elements of the horror genre in that poem. So they were asked to analyze and tell me what it is that made Frankenstein a true horror story. So that was the first center. The second center dealt with theme. They were given the theme of the poem that you should not judge someone by their appearance. The character in the story was blind, so he was unable. The old man who befriended Frankenstein was blind. He was unable. They'll have to rewrite endings and different things of that nature, use the same voice, the same tone, the same mood as the author. So in the narrative task, I gave them the option of choosing one of the three horror stories that we read so far, The Monkey's Paw, The Telltale Heart, and Frankenstein, and to rewrite or extend the ending using the same voice as the author. We're working on citing textual evidence. That's one of the top standards, citing textual evidence, because the students aren't accustomed to doing it. They like to just answer questions, and when you ask, how do you know? Well, because I know it's in the book. So we're working hard on that citing textual evidence, going back, giving me line numbers in the text that states, directly supporting your response with evidence from the text. Now, and it says evidence from Frankenstein. What does it tell you about the way Frankenstein looked? How do you know he was a monster? You're giving me evidence from the text to support the fact that Frankenstein was not a human. Okay? So that's the first box.
And in line 20, it states that he had no intention to hurt the old man.
It was his heartbeat.
His eyes.
Oh yeah, the one, like the little eye, the vulture thing. That's how he looked, how he started, the little eye, the vulture.
Our neighbors outside looking and wondering what's going on. Yeah, because you remember they had heard the sound when the old man was struggling.
Yeah. How many of you guys enjoyed the narrative task where you have the opportunity to extend one of the stories?
Me.
And one of the good things in their literary criticism, it said that one of the good things about a horror story is that not all of the time the author ends the story the way in which the reader would like. So I'm glad that some of you guys were upset by the ending. I remember reading Telltale Heart and Monkey's Paw as a student thinking, yeah, right, they are not going to end the story like that. Now that everyone has completed all three tasks, in the upper right-hand corner, I want you to give it a 1, 2, or 3. Which one of those tasks do you think were the most difficult? And this is your opinion. You don't have to agree with the people in your group. Which one do you think was the most difficult? Which one do you think was moderately difficult? And which one was the least difficult? I do a lot more facilitating now than actual teaching. I'm amazed at what the students are able to just grasp when everything is laid out and everything is organized properly and it makes sense to them. It's presented in a way that it makes sense to them. I really don't have to do as much teaching as I've done in the past. It's not Q.
Yeah, I love it when Anjanette says I'm not doing as much teaching. It's just different, and she and I had many conversations about that. And but you can see from this classroom how engaged the kids are, the level of discourse that the kids have as they're analyzing text just gets me super geeked up. And it's amazing how transformative balanced literacy, when it is in action in classrooms, how it transforms a class. Her particular classroom went up in performance by over 20% on the state assessment. In Illinois, we use PARC. And it's just so incredibly exciting to see those kinds of things. And this is what I'm seeing over and over and over again in the classrooms where I'm working. We're seeing growth of, double digits. Middle school that I was working with in Washington State, same thing. We got about 18% growth in 1 year. In 1 year. And the bottom line is that the kids are doing. Literacy is a process. It's not a program. And it really is about educators and instructing our kids and creating these kinds of learning environments. So there's tons more classroom videos like this where you can see these things in action and the different centers, and they're on my YouTube channel. And I'm going to show you another place where they are as well. So here's an example of a mini lesson, okay? We want to make sure that we keep it short, keep it focused. We model for kids our behaviors in literacy, and that instruction is chunks. So I always say your instruction has to be chunky. Gone are the days where we lecture from beginning to end of a class period. We know it doesn't work. The evidence is quite clear on that, not just on performance studies, but neurologically, from the neuroscience, we know that this doesn't work. So here's what a mini lesson would look like. So sticky notes, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but it's basically this, is that every time I have a personal connection, a question or a comment, I'm going to write it down in the sticky note and put it in the text. So I always say, that we want kids to listen to the voice in their head, but only when they're reading. We want them to use that voice in their head for good, not evil. And almost every single content literacy strategy is about developing that voice in their head and visualization. If a kid tells you that they don't see anything, they don't hear anything when they're reading, that's a big alarm bell, because they're having some serious breakdowns in comprehension. Okay, so here's what it looks like. This is from Hunger Games. It's the first page. And I model for kids how I do it. So when I read, I have voices in my head. Sometimes I have personal connections, I have comments, or I have questions about the text. So here's how it works. When I wake up on the other side of the bed, the other side of the bed is cold. My fingers stretch out, seeking Prim's warmth, but finding only the rough canvas cover of the mattress. She must have had bad dreams and climbed in with our mother. Of course she did. This is the day of the reaping. So I would show the kids right away, I'm going to put a sticky note right here next to reaping. I don't know what that word means here, but it doesn't sound good. So my question is, what is the reaping? And then I continue. I prop myself up on one elbow. There's enough light in the bedroom to see them. My little sister Prim curled up on her side, cocooned in my mother's body, their cheeks pressed together. In sleep, my mother looks younger, still worn, but not so beaten down. Prim's face is as fresh as a raindrop, as lovely as the primrose for which she was named. So I'm going to put another sticky note right here by this description of Prim. And I have a personal connection. My daughter is now 22. Just graduated from college, and it reminds me so much of my daughter, Ellie, when she would come home from college, even as a young woman at 20, 21, 22, falling asleep on the couch, and she still looked like my little baby girl. And if she knew that I had this on a national webcast, she'd probably die of embarrassment. So that's how it works. And so I model it for the kids, and I say, okay, now with a literacy partner, with a partner, I want you to keep reading for the next 5 minutes and do the same thing. Every time I have a personal connection, a comment, or a question, I'm going to put a sticky note next to it, next to the corresponding text, and they go and do that. Okay. And just so you know, if you go to engaginglearners.com, the sticky note strategy, exactly how I just described it, is available for download. So you can go there, get an account, you can type in the search engine sticky notes, and there it is. I also included it too for the handouts for this webinar. Oh, there I go again. Oh my goodness. Microsoft Word is just apologizing left and right for the fact that their program is not working tonight. And I have those I have that lesson for you as a handout as well, but you can also download it here. Okay, so let's move on. And here are examples of vocabulary slides. I'm sure many of you use these as well. And these are from my book, The Big Book of Graphic Organizers. And of course, there's a lot of free versions of these online. But if I show kids how to use a graphic organizer, that counts as a mini lesson. So I know that there's already things that you're using in your wheelhouse that can be basically repackaged, regifted into a center format and more chunked instruction. Questioning the author is another strategy too. I can model it for the kids in the mini lesson, and then the kids can practice it, and then it becomes part of the centers. It becomes an activity in the centers. So if you need those resources and ideas, just go to engaginglearners.com. They're available there. Okay. So here are some tips to get started. These are things that I've learned the hard way. So, as a parent, I say, do as I say, not as I do. So here's how, here's some advice. So in centers, kids can work in small groups or they can work individually. Either way is fine. And then each center has a clearly articulated learning activity. And what I'm finding as well in the research that I've been doing is that kids with special needs, kids that are in inclusive classrooms do really well. All kids benefit when activities are clearly articulated and the directions are stated, because they can focus on one thing at a time rather than what they think the teacher is thinking. And they do very, very well on it, and also creating that collaborative community, which is what we want inclusive classrooms to look like, or to manifest. So the first bit of advice is write out all the directions for the kids. Telling them is not enough. They have to be written out. And if you saw the pre-show, you saw my colleague Adrienne Clarisi. She's a 7th grade teacher in New Mexico. She explains how she gives directions to kids, how she writes them out, and she just puts them on a piece of cardboard so it's less likely to lose the paper or lose the directions. And then explain procedures and have them written out and posted in your classroom. If you go to engaginglearners.com, I have posters, and I actually have posters with examples of procedures and expectations. And make sure that they're posted and they're clear. And then I like to create a makeup center, which isn't where the 7th grade girls fix their mascara. It's actually a DI strategy, because no matter how hard I try, I can't get everything perfectly timed. It's pretty much impossible. So once kids go through a rotation, if there's any work that they haven't finished, they can complete it at the makeup center. They can also revise their work. They can assess their work. And actually, Adrienne Clarisi, the teacher I just mentioned, she, at her makeup site, she calls it the Reflection Center. And she's basically got a list of 20 things that you should be doing at the Reflection Center. So, it's like number 1 is complete any work that you haven't completed. If you've done that, do this. If you've done that, do this. And I said, one time I asked her, I said, how far did any of your students get on that? And she said, well, about number 8. And number 8 was the farthest anybody got on the list. But that there's no lost instructional time. And the kids report too to me how fast time goes, that they lose track of time. And then the school that I was working with, that I work with in Washington State, the principal was telling me that the kids like the centers, but they say, wow, we never have any downtime anymore. We're always working, which of course is music to any principal, teacher, educator's ears, right? That the kids know how hard they're working. So what am I doing? I'm generally at the TeacherLed Center. I'm circulating with the kiddos and supporting them. Formal assessment usually occurs at the end of the unit, but we do formative assessment within the center's model. And then when possible, notice that I say when possible, I like to give kids a choice at each center. So if we're doing vocabulary, they might do a concept sort, or they might be doing a graphic organizer, so giving them choice. Or if we're learning about something in science, I might give them 4 articles to read and they choose one of those. So giving them choice is highly, highly motivating. Okay, so let's look at what this looks like. I always say that there's 4 foundational centers. So no matter what subject you teach, I always suggest that you start with these 4. And the first is the Teacher-Led Center. And that's pretty magical, because that's my opportunity to bring my kids to me, and I can work with them on a more one-to-one small group basis. Really valuable. I've had an AP chemistry teacher tell me how much she loves that, because if the kids are missing a concept, she can group them and then go over that concept with them to make sure that they understand it. And especially in a course like that, where all the information, the content is cumulative. And if you misunderstand one thing, like a covalent bond, it's going to make things harder along the way. And then a reading together center, where the kids practice their reading skills even more, or a strategy that I may have employed. And then writer's craft is that they are working on some aspect of writing. They're not writing a composition from beginning to end in the writer's craft. They might be working on something very specific, like word choice, or making sure evidence is tied to the claim, writing great claim statements, learning how to cite references, so things like that. And then, of course, vocabulary. So you have these 4 centers, and I always recommend starting with these 4. And then depending on your subject area, you can always add more. So for instance, in ELA, these are some suggested centers, like something on grammar and language, literary devices, speaking and listening. And by the way, listening to text, listening to a audio recording of text, like an audiobook, is not cheating. It's a way that we can make text accessible to kids. It also, remember on the 6 elements that Allington identified, listening to a fluent adult read. So it's not just us as the teachers in the room, it's also using audio assist. So audio assist is not cheating. And then I always recommend in text heavy subjects like ELA that we always have, oh, it died on me again. Wow, this is just like, I feel like there's a sign here of something, but I'm just grateful that GoToMeeting, the web service, isn't croaking on me. And then with text heavy subjects like ELA, I always recommend that we do an additional reading together center. And I'm going to show you a quick video of what that looks like. And then for social studies, we have maps and charts, primary source documents, viewing, speaking and listening. Those are some other examples, supplemental centers that you can have in addition to the 4 foundational. This is a group of 7th grade girls. There's one young man over here, but I didn't have permission to record him, but there is one more member of the group. And they have a graphic organizer, and they're going through Omnivore's Dilemma and reading together. So here's kind of what it looks like.
The fossil fuel it takes to make pesticides. The diesel used by the tractors and fuel needed to harvest, dry, and transport the corn. Add it all, and you find that every bushel of corn is industrial.
Yeah. So she's taking the lead and reading, and they're taking turns. There's one young man here. She's recording, and not to go into too much reason, she's not being obstinate. There's a reason why she is not looking in the text. So I'm just going to say that there's an educational reason. Here's yours truly with that group of kids in Indiana, a group of 5th graders. And I'm doing a teacher-led center with them, and we're going over vocabulary that was introduced in the mini lesson in a pretty complex text that we were looking at.
And then what's the last one? Yeah. And again, for number 5, action. So we're looking at roaring, dumps, sputtering.
Yeah, so we're kind of looking at nuances, connotation, denotation in language. So that's what it looks like. And you can hear the buzz in the classroom, you know, that there's kids working in other centers. This is a particularly large class, too. There were 33 kids in that class as well. And you already saw a picture of them and how focused on task they were. Here's what it might look like in science. So I have observation. They might do lab technique. Again, I'm putting in speaking and listening. And then also viewing. There's so many wonderful visuals that are available, so many different websites to show videos of different kinds of different kinds of things that are science related. Yeah. And then here's for mathematics application. Critical application and practice. Just like ELA teachers, you have kids who are reading all, at all different levels. It's the same thing in mathematics, that practice. And then also the teacher-led center gives an opportunity for interventions, remediation, and mathematics as well. So this is what I always suggest for implementation phases, because it can get a little overwhelming. So here's what I suggest is start with the physical environment. Just change the physical environment first. That's something very concrete and not too difficult to do. And then the next thing that we need to look at is increasing cognitive load. And then finally, as it freezes once again, is looking at formative assessment and is looking at assessment and evaluation. And that doesn't mean that these are lockstep. What it means is that, I'm going to focus on physical environment, but that doesn't mean that I'm also not looking at increasing cognitive load and assessment and feedback. Those things are happening still, but that's where my primary focus. So to break down, this is what it looks like even more. In phase 1, I might look at seating, movement, chunking of instruction, depending on the developmental level. And the other question I ask too is how many kids in a group? Generally 3 to 5 kids in a group. And then those written directions and student choice. And then phase 2 is collaborative higher order thinking skills of really looking at what kids are doing and making sure that they're working at a high level. So incorporating things like Bloom's taxonomy or Marzano's taxonomy, or if you use Webb's depth of knowledge, any of those to make sure that we're ratcheting things up. And then we're really focusing on those skills, that skills-based mastery, and tying it to proficiency scales. And then that last phase, we really start getting into looking at our formative assessment, interventions, descriptive immediate feedback, and then making sure that teacher-led center is working well and effectively. And that immediate feedback, I'm probably going to do a webinar this fall that'll be one of the topics on giving kids descriptive feedback, and also on the podcast Two Lit Ladies. So how to implement and manage centers, so getting into the classroom management of centers and all kinds of teacher tips. Those are that's going to be the focus of a specific webinar this fall. And also, if you go to that YouTube channel, there's all kinds of teacher tips, and there's also ones on engaging learners. Here again, you can also integrate technology. This is a classroom in Tennessee. This is Kristen Lonigan's classroom. And you can see that Kristen is going from group to group on this particular one. And they're one-to-one, so everything is computer-based. But even though it's computer-based, I hope you recognize, too, that you can hear the kids talking about what they're doing. So it makes me kind of crazy when we, start using computers. Computers are a tool. They're a wonderful tool. But we want to make sure that kids are also talking about their reading and writing. So I'm going to take questions in a moment, but just some reminders. This is where you can find me. Okay, and the handout is listed here. If you have any difficulty with any of getting the handouts or such, just go ahead and email me at katieengagelearners@gmail.com, and I will put that in the question bubble, the chat bubble, to so that you have it. But I'm also all over the place too on the internet and such. But we want our kids to be those active and independent learners, and growing our kids as best as we can. And clearly that's something that is shared with everyone who's online tonight. That you're giving time away from possibly your families and such tonight in order to increase our professional knowledge. And so we want that. All of us want that. We want our kids to be the best that they can possibly be. And here is my email address, and then also my phone number. So if you need anything related to this webinar, or anything else, please do contact me. I do get in touch with people. I do respond to emails and such. This is the Engaging Learner site. And just so you can see too, like here is an activity. You can see that it's good for writer's craft, and then also a lot of other aspects that it covers. I don't align it to any particular group of standards because everybody has their own nuances. But I do have things like, use it for point of view, task, purpose, audience, and you can easily line it up with your specific state standards, whatever you might use. And so for this one, for instance, this is the teacher activity. These are the skills in here. So express and explain multiple points of view, integrate point of view, and voice in writing. I can tell you right now that in the Common Core standards, that is listed under standard number 3, this particular skill. So here's the activity, what you need to do to prep for it. And there's also handouts, graphics, the tools that you would need to create that lesson. And all of these are teacher-tested recipes. And for example, here's the sticky note one, so you can download it. And here's a poster that you can use at the actual center. So you can just go ahead and print it and use it. And then this is also the directions that you might need for your instruction as well. So all of these are on here. And again, that 14-day membership is my gift to all of you. These are the teacher tip videos again. So you can see that there's teachers from all over
and I'm
the
here
United
with
States.
Adrienne Clarisi, 8th grade teacher at Hermosa Middle School. And here's a tip. That's good.
Sure.
Okay.
So I interview teachers and just kind of, colleagues, like, how are you using this in the classroom? I noticed that you have a great organization strategy, and we just record it on my little camera, on my little GoPro, and I got this great college kid who edits them for me, and it's a way to increase the conversation. So so what's the closure? Hopefully the PowerPoint won't crash again, but let me take some questions. I see some in the question box. And Christine, you said that do you do timed rotations of centers, 3 to 5 students at each center, or they move at their own pace? Here's my recommendation, Christine, is that when you first get started, I would time the rotations always. And I use a timer for that. And there's a teacher tip video on using timers. And I really strongly urge you to use a timer because it helps the kids to self-regulate and it helps to keep them on task. And in many classrooms that I've gone into, we didn't have a timer going. And I would say to the teacher, we need to, to our colleague, I would say, start using the timer and let's see what happens. And as soon as that happens, it gets tighter. And then if you want the kids to move at their own pace, like once they develop the routines that we expect in centers, then I would move them towards that because that's kind of a higher level. And I have seen classrooms that we get to that level. It's not a lot. It's less than 10%. But then the teacher usually has a menu that the kids follow, and they go from center to center. Cindy writes that she's a math teacher and she's ready to try centers. Woohoo! Good for you. You're in your second week of school, and you want to implement now. Suggestions for reading in Math 7 and Math 8. Yes. Go to mathalicious.com. I'm going to type in that site right now. Wonderful, wonderful site that really, I think, out of anything that I've seen, does the best job as far as truly implementing reading and writing in the classroom. Another great one that you might want to look at is, excuse me, thinkcirca.com. And they've just recently in the last year started to add math materials, and they're also really fabulous as well. And the other thing too, allergies, I'm starting to cough. Christine, is if you have any additional questions or such, please drop me a line at my email. And I can talk to you more in depth, like we can arrange a Skype meeting or something like that and chat some more. Because math is always a little bit different, and I'd love to have that conversation with you. Okay, excuse me. How long is your block of time for centers? Do you do this every day using the structure? Do you do anything with reading writer or reading workshop? Yes, the answer is yes. The structure is malleable, right? So, when I started as a baby teacher in the late 80s, reader writing workshop, Nancy Atwell and that whole gang and Lucy Calkins, that was all brand new cutting edge stuff when I was a baby teacher. And so here are some thoughts on it, Kathy, is that the first thing is that it depends on how long you have in a block. There's some schools that I work in, especially in middle school and high school, where they have 50, 60 minutes. There's no way you're going to get mini lesson, guided practice and centers in 50 minutes. There's no way. So think of it, when I was in teacher school, we always looked at lessons needed to be like 40, 50 minutes, and that was it, or the instructional plan. And we can't really think like that anymore. So if I have a 90-minute block, I could probably get to all of this. If I have more like a 70-minute block or like 50 minutes or something, you start with your mini lesson, your guided practice, and maybe you get to 1 or 2 centers. And then the next day you continue where you left off. So we have to think of it going over more than one class period. And as far as reading, writing workshop, yeah, absolutely. You could double up on centers, right? So you could have some of your kids engaged in reading, writing workshop and having longer time chunks, or break it up into those centers. There's a teacher I work with in California who is first grade teacher, and she's a fabulous Lucy Calkins implementer, and she also added centers as well. So if kids need more time to write, you can make it a double center. You can make that writing center that kids stay there for 2 rotations, and then they continue on. So I hope that I made myself clear on that, what you could do with that. Yeah, and then Crystal, I see too that you guys are doing balanced literacy over there in Houston. Yeah, it's just amazing how it transforms a classroom, truly. So I am totally, convinced of it, how it works. But I find that a lot of times, as colleagues, as educators, we get inundated with so much, and it gets overwhelming. So how can we create structures? And I always joke, that you need your Saturday nights, right? You need your Saturday nights to yourself. So how do we do that and work differently rather than piling on more work? And, this centers model that I've developed is really with the input of teachers from all over the United States. And I really want to acknowledge the teachers that are featured in these videos. Kristen Lonigan in Laverne Middle School in Tennessee, and Joanne Maddox, who's a veteran teacher of over 35 years in Anderson, Indiana, and Adrian Clarisi, who was in Farmington, New Mexico, and now teaches in Durango, Colorado. I mean, these are fabulous, wonderful teachers, and Jeanette White as well. So not only is it to demonstrate what we can do with balanced literacy and the literacy and learning center model, but I also want to get the word out about the fabulous educators of which I'm a part of that community, and very privileged to be that part of the community. So I hope you'll join on the newsletter. We've got the podcast, we have the website, and I really do mean it most sincerely that if you have questions, please, please, please contact me at katieengagelearners@gmail.com. And then also, if you need a professional certificate to document your time on this webcast, please email me at that email address, and my fabulous assistant, Elaine Carlson, will send you a certificate. I've got one more question that I want to take from Jessica. Ideally, should centers be happening daily, or is this something to use a few days a week? The answer, Jessica, is either one. You should decide what you think is going to work best. But I don't recommend that you do it and then it's 2 weeks later that you do it. There has to be a regular structure. So at the minimum, I would recommend 2 days a week. You could go every day if you wanted to. You could do 3 days a week and 2 days not do it. It really is a malleable structure. But again, I want to point out that Allington slide. This is our litmus test. This is the canary in the coal mine, okay? If I'm covering all 6 of these things in my instruction, you've got it. You're absolutely on track, and you're providing the absolute best instruction for your kiddos. So you'll receive an email, a follow-up email, letting you know that this is posted online. And I do mean it. Please stay in touch. I hope you find the resources that are on the Engaging Learner site. They're designed specifically for grades 4 through 12. And I'd love to hear some feedback if there's any particular lessons or resources that you find particularly valuable as we're still developing that site. I really would appreciate your feedback. It would help me tremendously going forward. So I want to thank all of you for joining me tonight. And also, those of you who have started school, Yahoo, get at them. And those of us who are still have a couple of weeks left, enjoy the rest of your very precious summer vacation days. And I look forward to hearing from you on another webinar. I'll be posting the schedule for the fall. It'll be available in my newsletter. It'll also be available on my website. So can't wait to hear from you guys again. Teresa, you are more than welcome, and so happy to be able to give back to my community. And talk to you guys soon. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.